So I think there's just some kind of mind reading or coincidence going on that part of what I'm going to talk about today, Venerable started teaching on yesterday in the class. It was part of something that I realized helped me to maybe grow a little more in my understanding of karma. It came from doing the 35 Buddha practice in part. And what I've noticed lately is when we learn about karma, we learn about four main general characteristics. And I think that the second one, that karma expands, magnifies, has become more prominent in my mind. It's actually helping me to curtail my negativities. Like right in the midst of things, I'm thinking, do I really want to do this? I don't think so. So that's something I've been thinking about lately. And for those who aren't so familiar, we learn about these 4 points about karma. It's one of the first things you learn, and Venerable spoke about them at our last holiday retreat over the Memorial Day. And the first one is that karma is certain or definite, meaning that actually when you do virtuous activities, happiness will follow. So all the pleasant feelings that we have actually are related to our previous actions. And it only works that way. When we do negative actions, those actually aren't the cause of our happiness. So it's very definite that the sufferings that we endure and that we have come from previous unwholesome actions, maybe in previous lives even. But it's impossible for like happiness to come from non-virtue and unhappiness to come from virtue. So that's the first point. And the second one is that it expands. And what I didn't really, until I was thinking about this and then reading about it a little bit more, I didn't really, I think the way it went was this. When I first learned about that, I think I was in Seattle and I must have been doing my taxes. And I was thinking, yeah, if you just move that decimal point a little bit, it's a very small action, but it could have a very big result. And for years, I kind of left that point like that, It's just like, yeah, don't move those decimal points around too much or you might end up in jail, And that's as far as I kind of went with that. And then it just, for some reason, is something I'm thinking about more right now. I think because of the first verses, I believe the first aspect of that more, that the certainty or the definite, karma is definite. But I didn't really understand that actually the way at least Lama Tsongkhapa talks about it is that, an effect of immense happiness may arise from even a small virtuous karma, and that an immense suffering may arise from even a tiny non-virtuous karma. Well, I kind of maybe had thought about that a little bit, but I didn't really ever get that this was even more pronounced than what we see in like the physical world. Because the idea they usually teach is, when they teach us, they say, well, that little acorn can become this huge tree. But actually what he's saying is that the results of karma are like even more so than that. Like what happened, internally, that kind of causation that we have that's karmic is a kind of magnification that isn't even seen in the external causation. That's his words. So that really is like, oh, well, this is even a little bigger than I thought. And then when I started looking back at what I had read at that time, these verses still strike me that he takes from, apparently from the utterances of the Buddha, where he talks about that do not think that the commission of even a tiny non-virtue will not pursue you. Just as a large vessel is filled by falling drops of water, this is the part that speaks to me, so too a fool is filled with non-virtue accumulated a little at a time. And that really struck me as true. I mean, and the reverse also strikes me as true, which is that as you accumulate virtue, so too the steadfast are filled up by virtues accumulated a little at a time. And when I read that years ago, it made sense to me, and it still makes sense to me when I think about my own, I don't know if I'd say personality, but my own traits, personality traits, and people I've known, where I've gone being foolish and where I've been steadfast. It seems like those things have developed like bit by bit. You just don't quite, they aren't all formed at once. And so that always made sense to me. And the fact that these little things that we do matter, they add up. And I think you can kind of see that in people's lives, like as you get older, all the fun we were having when we were in our 20s, as you see people who keep doing that same kind of stuff year after year after year. Actually, at my age, most of them aren't alive right now. Many of those people haven't survived that youthful experimentation. It doesn't quite, that's so that, and then when I thought more in the present tense, like, why is this more strong for me now? One thing that came to mind was when I first became formally a Buddhist, or started going to a place, which because I had read books since I was a teenager, since I was young, but I didn't really want anything to do with religious establishments till 2000. And when I first started going, I had learned this little, very short, like 4 or 5 line practice of green Tara. And I remember it being very important to me. And, I was doing it every day, and it had a lot of meaning for me. And I remember talking to this fellow I had met at Sakya Monastery, and we were talking about that, and he said, he made it seem like it was like nothing because the sadhana that they do takes like an hour and a half. What I was doing was like 5 lines. And I remember thinking, I don't think so. I don't think you've got this right, because it was very meaningful to me. And I actually see a thread, even from that time period to my practice now, that is something that was very small then, and it still carries with me. But more so, I think what has made me see this magnification of karma is actually our purification practice that we do. And these verses that we say when we do the general confession of the 35 Buddhas, now in the presence of the spiritual mentors, the great Vajra holders, all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who abide in the 10 directions, and the Venerable Sangha, I confess all of these destructive actions. I will not conceal them, and I accept them as destructive. I promise to refrain from doing these actions again in the future. By confessing and acknowledging them, I will attain and abide in happiness, while by not confessing and acknowledging them, true happiness will not come. And because we've done this practice like twice a day for so many years, we have, some experience starts to accumulate. And it's very clear to me how the mind feels when you're concealing something versus when you can crack things open, and how uncomfortable that is, and how good it feels to just let go of all that, all the psychological unburdening that happens from doing purification once you are able to separate out maybe guilt from actually just regret healthy regret that we have for things. Just seeing the relationship between when my mind is afflicted and when it's not, and how my actions go and when they aren't, that whole experience that we have, I think it kind of just proves the first point, that karma is definite. Maybe we aren't like a Buddha where we can know all the particulars of it, but we have our own experience. Just like when I went to Airway Heights and I was teaching something about karma there, and the guys were like, we don't have any trouble believing karma. They were just like, what goes around comes around. And it was just like, all this that it needed to be like, oh, I don't know the particularities. They could have cared less. They just were like bought in. And I feel like that for myself, I feel a little more that way than I must have before. And what I like about this also is that we're always so involved with the 8 worldly concerns, and we aren't actually practicing the Dharma yet. And these kind of reflections about karma are the things that will help us to let go of our attachment for this life. And then we're really starting to practice the Dharma then, because, like we say in our verses from the Sakya tradition, of those, what's a Dharma practitioner? Well, actually, most of my concerns are still for this life, and our Dharma practice is actually for more than this life. It's for our future lives. And so trying to get to that first scope even is quite an accomplishment, I feel. I feel good if I can get there in this life, because that will take me to, it will keep it going. So I think that thinking about karma is so important, and I'm glad that we're have had many reflections on this in the last weeks. It's come up many times. And that as we do these reflections, we'll be able to make progress that will help us with our longer term goals related to this life, related to even future lives, and also avoiding harm. We'll be much more able, I think, as we understand what brings us happiness, as we see the advantages and disadvantages of our actions, even our thoughts, to be able to progress.